Our contributing editor, Niall Ferguson, is a scholar of history, economic history. He is joining us now from Newton, Massachusetts, where he is a professor at Harvard University. Neil, welcome back, as always, to the Inside Track. Do you think that now looks like 2008? We're hearing some pretty big voices saying, in their view, it is.
Well, I'm inclined to agree, because I've warned for some time now that the possibility of a European Lehman Brothers should keep us all awake at night. In some ways, it's surprising that this didn't happen sooner, since it's been an open secret, really since 2008, that the European debt crisis was in fact a European banking crisis. And now what we're seeing is a rerun of what happened in the U.S. in 08-09, when fear about bank solvency caused a kind of contagion effect through the system and a breakdown, in fact, of credit relationships. It's just taken rather longer than I anticipated to happen in Europe.
Neil, the talk in Europe over the weekend seems to have moved a little closer to a fiscal union. You heard Mario Draghi and Jean-Claude Trichet both talking about the need for some kind of a fiscal consolidation, whatever you want to call it. And you and I and Deirdre have talked about this before. Would that solve the banking crisis if, in fact, Europe developed some kind of a taxing authority that could effectively officialize, if you will, the transfer of money from Germany to the rest of Europe to buoy all of the economies that are at risk?
Erik, if we could wave a magic wand and turn the European Union into the United States of Europe, that would certainly solve the problem. The trouble the Europeans have is that they created a monetary union without having any fiscal union, without, in effect, being a federal state. And those of us who know some history said this probably won't work. In fact, it has no precedent for working. In the past, monetary unions have always been associated with much higher levels of political unity, so that the transfers from the core to the periphery, from the productive to the less productive, are automatic and don't have to be agreed on an ad hoc basis. So that's the European problem. But there is no magic wand. I mean, you can say what you like as a central banker. Trichet has said this before, but this is a political problem. It was already difficult to sell federalism to European member states before this financial crisis came along. Since it began, the Germans have lost, as a population, all real faith in the idea of further integration. And that's why Chancellor Angela Merkel is really the key figure here. If she had been able to sell to the Germans the idea of some kind of transfer union or fiscal union, then it might be a starter. But at the moment, the German voters are pounding her coalition for what they've already done in the way of bailing out Greece.
Just out of curiosity, though, Josef Ackerman also saying another measure he doesn't think is going to help is dissolving the eurozone. I'm just going to read from a quote here. He says, "It's a dangerous illusion to believe the country could do better." That's Germany, obviously. "Should it reclaim the sovereignty it has delegated to the EU?" So it seems like some pretty big business-leading voices from Germany don't want the euro to dissolve.
Well, Joe Ackerman, I think, is Swiss by birth, and he knows that there's a downside to perfect national sovereignty. And if you're as virtuous as the Swiss are, and indeed the Germans are, what you end up with in this world is an extremely strong currency. The Swiss today are desperately intervening to stop, once again, their currency rallying relative to the euro. If Germany were to revert to the Deutschmark and simply walk away from the eurozone, pretty quickly, I think it would find itself in a similar situation. So to adopt a classical illusion, the Europeans are between the Scylla of a currency breakup and the Charybdis of a federal union that nobody wants. And that's an extremely troubling situation to be in, because it means that the economic solution is politically impossible. You know, Joe Ackerman talked about 2008, but I'd go further back in time, Deirdre. This is like 1931, midway through the Great Depression, when a major banking crisis in Central Europe, sparked by the failure of Credit Anstalt, plunged the world into the Great Depression's second and worst round.
So, Neil, if that is the case, if we are looking at something akin to what not just the U.S. economy but the global economy faced in the early 1930s, what happens next? What do the lessons of history teach us?
Well, the lessons, I think, are very clear. Without international coordination, this thing gets worse. What we have at the moment is a kind of every man for himself situation, epitomized by currency interventions by central banks out of national self-interest. What is desperately needed right now to prevent this thing turning into something that could be even worse than the post-Lehman crisis is a major international effort that will offer security to those people who are worried about bank failures, and some hope of stabilization of the fiscal position in weaker countries.
All right, Neil, always good to have you here in the Inside Track. Our contributing editor, professor at Harvard University, Niall Ferguson. Neil, we'll see you again soon.